let's go. What is law? Law is a body of writing, a body of thought. It is an entire conglomeration of reasoning in order that society be well ordered and individuals be as protected as we can based upon what we know, based upon the facts of a situation. Okay? So we're looking at rules with interest and emphasis on the community. The system is not perfect. Why is the system not perfect? Zach, why is the system not perfect?
Maybe there are many reasons it's not perfect, but to speak generally, I think it's because that the world and society is always changing, so laws need to be adapted and changed to fit the current situation, so it can never really be perfect.
That is a correct answer. The major answer that I always give is that law is created by human beings. We are fallible creatures. Many of us are more fallible than others, especially those in power who think they know everything, but do not. And that goes at many levels. So, the weaknesses in the law come from fallible human beings who all have three types of individual agenda. And every single one of us has an agenda for every situation. A public agenda is an agenda that says, this is what I want to do. This is what I'm going to do. This is what I am doing. My public agenda in here is to give you my knowledge of the law and teach you what I know we are going to work with at any given time. That's my public agenda. So, what would be my private agenda? The enjoyment I get?
From teaching or whatever.
The enjoyment I get from teaching, that's a good example. What else? You had one.
Thank you.
Hmm?
I'm good, yeah. You said what I was going to say.
Okay. Okay.
Things that you only share with people close to you.
Things that I only share with people close to me. That's right. So my private agenda is anything that comes from my public agenda, but I don't tell everybody. You all know that I'm here to teach. That's my public agenda. I'm here to impart knowledge. What I have in my head, I'm going to try and give to you so that you know. My private agenda comes from that. And let's make it really basic. I want to make sure I keep getting paid on the 15th and the 30th of every month. That's a good private agenda, don't you think? Secret agenda. What is a secret agenda? I have a public agenda that I like to teach. I have a private agenda that I want to get paid. What would be a secret agenda that I might have? Yes, sir.
You could be only working to keep your pension.
Get my pension. That's a good example. Robert?
What you want to use the money for?
What I want to use the money for. That's right. And I would not tell anyone what I use the money for. That is the secret. Right? Okay. A philosopher named Immanuel Kant said that every single opinion every single action, every single thought that anyone ever has is layered in lightness and in darkness. None of us are all completely Jedi or completely Sith. Okay, now who got that reference? Explain.
Like the light side, dark side, right?
The light side and dark side. No one is completely pure. No one is completely evil. But there are layers in there that approximate those philosophical lightnesses or darknesses. And that's with every decision, everything we do. That's what makes ethics so important. I put this down, there's always a ram with a bell around its neck. Anybody from farm here? Do we have any guys or ladies that have been out in the farm? Anybody been camping when there were farm animals that decided to invade the campground? What does a ram have around its neck? A lot of times. A bell. How do the sheep know where to go at what time of the day? They follow the ram. How do they know where the ram is? Because of the bell. And the faster that ram runs, the louder the bell gets. So in the law, people are likely to follow the individual who is loudest and who is moving the fastest and who is acting like they know something that nobody else does. Have you experienced that? That is part of weakness in the law, because there's always somebody who thinks they know more about the law than the next guy. And we know from the Bible that there will always be those greater and lesser than ourselves. So even the guy that has access to the bell has somebody out there that has a better bell. There exist out there some things we call the schools of legal thought. Okay? The schools of legal thought. The schools of legal thought group ideologies and opinions together into one central concept, and then a lot of people work with that. The first one is the natural law school. The natural law school's beliefs involve concepts that the government and the legal system should reflect universal moral and ethical principles that are inherent in human life. Does anyone in here know a universal moral or ethical principle? All right. Don't kill people. Thou shalt not kill. It's been around for time immemorial.
Isn't like the golden rule?
Ah, the golden rule.
You have to do it to you.
Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Of course, there are always those that believe that you do unto others before they can possibly do it to you. Those are the folks we have to work and watch out for. They're the ones with the secret agendas that we need to avoid. The positivist school believes that the law was created at a particular time by a society. And those particular beliefs are the highest laws that can exist. So, we have the U.S. Constitution. We believe that that is the highest law that could be created. We ascribe to the use of the U.S. Constitution in our laws. We apply statute law. We'll break all this down. This is a general comments. That the law was created by society and that it is the highest of its laws. We get a little complicated now. The sociological school. The sociological school proposes that there are three things in determining law. The first one is that we have legislators that the people elect and judges that judge individuals who have gone against the laws of the society, who will make an inventory of community interests. It's up to the community to decide that we're going to go out and patch all the potholes on Charlotte Avenue. That would be an example of something that the legislators and the judges would determine. Then, the judges and legislators use that inventory to familiarize themselves with community standards and mores. They go out and say to the community, hey community, we want to take a poll. We want to find out if you think that we should patch all these potholes, or should we just repave the entire street? And they would give an alternative. Then the legislators and the judges would rule or legislate in conformity with the standards and morals. The poll that was given to the legislators and the judges by the people who were affected. The most important factor here was the poll itself, and that has to do with human behavior. Now that's tricky, isn't it? Because we've already said that every human being has three agendas: the public, the private, and the secret. Now, how are we to determine what factor in human behavior and what agenda is going to most influence their decision in the sociological school? See why I said it was getting a little more complicated? We're starting to combine stuff. Yeah.
So kind of like the movie The Purge, in a sense, like the last one, where because of the violence, they like lawmakers will like people of high power like wanted to like come up with something to decrease the violence, but they had like a secret agenda behind the whole thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, to purge the city by letting people like
Increase violence.
increase violence to decrease it more, but it was just like a hidden agenda to remove all like African Americans and stuff.
There was also a very old Star Trek episode, the original series. This was back before any of you were even born. That had the concept that they found a perfect utopian society where everyone was absolutely perfect and well behaved all the time. And the leaders of the Star Trek spaceships that were there, particularly the Enterprise, could not believe they were so well behaved. Always, they were very polite. They were very helpful. They had servant attitude until once a year when they had something called the Red Hour, and it went from 12 noon to 1 p.m. when, like the Purge, everything goes. And things were destroyed, people were hurt, it was just awful. And so that is a common concept and a common thread throughout our society and our ethics, that people can be perfectly well behaved, but at some point, everyone is going to snap if they're too well behaved, right? And that's what you were saying. we have to be very careful. Human behavior is the most important thing. The American Realist School, not to be confused with the Realist School of Painting, although it is similar to the sociological school in many of its aspects, it has a focus on the actors in the judicial system itself, the prosecutors, the judges, the bailiffs, the police officers. All of those people, they're in the judicial system, but not in the community at large. They are a judicial or elected elite that makes the decision for others. Has anybody ever experienced something like that in history class? Have you heard in history class or experienced that there are certain actors in a judicial system instead of the community at large that make all the decisions for someone else?
Would it be like the electoral college?
Electoral college is a very good example of that. And that goes back a lot farther than we would like to think. My first exposure to this type of thing, where it's elite in the community at large, was when I studied the French Revolution. And they had a judicial system which was done by a committee of the people, called the Committee of Safety. The Committee of Safety was led by an individual named Madame Lafarge. Anyone ever heard of her? She was a mean one. And she forced her values on everybody. The bad thing was she had no background in law. She had no background in ethics. And it went too far, and the people finally rebelled again. So in total, there were 5 French revolutions. Not just the one we hear about. There were 5. So the most important factor in the American Realist School sees law as a means of enforcing political and social values. And as I just talked about with the French Revolution, that leads to some dangerous unpredictability in the law because individuals can overshadow their peers. Yeah.
Does this look more like a dictatorship?
It looks like a dictatorship, or it looks like an oligarchy, where there are 2 or more individuals, but not as many as, say, in our Congress, who are making the decisions for everyone on a continuing basis. It's a very small group, and they're all afraid of each other. They're all watching each other, and they're all spying on each other to make sure that their own thoughts and ideas are being followed.
More like world companies?
Yes, that would be very good. That would be very good. Then we have something called the crits. And it's called the Critical Legal Studies School. It's a contemporary expansion of legal realism. It looks to connect law to the political economic context within which it occurs. Those of you who have studied history and understand what happened in the Soviet Union and the Marxist Revolution can see that the Critical Legal Studies School is very similar to a study of what happened inside Soviet Russia from 1917 until 1983. Here, law reflects a cluster of beliefs that the hierarchy is natural and must be accommodated. It's used by elitists. Here we are again. There's a certain elite level to rationalize dominant power. And they say, we know this, we believe this, so it must be right for everybody. states that elitists use mass communications, religion, and law to reinforce established wealth and privilege. Well, they can either use religion, mass communication, and law to reinforce, or they can take them away. The Soviet Union took away mass communications and enforced their own form of communications, which was a single news source that we called Pravda, or the Politburo. They took away religion and outlawed the exercise of religion in the Soviet Union. And they used law to reinforce their own wealth and privilege at a higher level. It was the members of the Communist Party that were in charge. So see how that works? That's what the crits look like in reality. Only by critiquing structures like this can we as individuals change that hierarchical system so that we can force social and legal change. Now, this assumes that we have the freedom to do that. After so many generations of the crits existing in an area, the ability to change and the freedom to act without retribution disappears. So if we see this type of behavior occurring, we have to change it within a very short period of time, within a generation, or it starts to self-perpetuate. Had anybody thought about things like this before? I want to get you thinking about this if you haven't, and applying it to situations that you see out in the world in general. The feminist school, we had a movement of a few decades ago that started called the feminist school. Because significant rights have been denied to women, the traditional common law view constructed to favor male views on individual rights should be changed to reflect a culture of caring which reflects the female persona and what they have been going through. So, in my Twitter feed coming up in the next week or so, there is an article that talks about white females having hit the glass ceiling. But it also says that black females have hit a concrete ceiling. Read that article. It's coming up within the next week. It's very well written, very well reasoned, and it's something that we have to break, something that we have to tear down.
So, when you say white and black, does that mean more related?
Yes, it does.
Because I heard that black women don't get paid as much as white women do.
That is correct. The scale generally goes, Asian men are at the top, white men are second, white women are third, black men are fourth, black women are fifth at the lower end. Now, that shouldn't be. That's why we study ethics. That's why we try and change the law. That's why we are all here. Okay, my secret agenda is coming out. We need to enforce, in some way, equality. Okay? Law and Economics School. This advocates the use of classical economic theory, which you will learn here, and empirical methods of economics to explain and predict some judges' decisions in areas like torts, contracts, property, criminal, and administrative law. So, such as an example, an individual is hurt in an automobile accident. They require medical care. Who should pay for that medical care? The person that hit them. That means that what we're looking at is to use classical economic theory in torts to make sure that individuals in the same or similar circumstances are always treated in similar fashion. It's not always fair. What we're looking for is something we call equity. It is as equal in its application as it can be, although it's not always fair. Adherents of this school argue that most court decisions and the legal decisions they depend upon are best understood as efforts to promote an efficient allocation of resources in society. Critics say there are many schools of economic thought, and no single body of principles governs economics. Thus, by no convergence of the proper allocation of resources by the state. What does that mean? That's a bunch of words. That means that there are so many people out there with their own opinion of what constitutes economic justice that we can't get everybody together. We can try. There are too many rams with too many bells right now. Okay? Do I have any questions on that? That was a complicated one. So, let's talk about the purposes of law. The purposes of law are to provide order, serve as an alternative to altercation. So instead of having somebody who's going to go out on the street and try and get his lawnmower back from his neighbor who borrowed it by threat of force, he can go to court and have that neighbor penalized for keeping his lawnmower too long.
I have a question.
Yeah, sure.
Is the laws more important than the Constitution?
Constitution is the law.
Okay, so if the law is run by the Constitution, then why, you know how you just brought up the women and the black, so if it's run by that, how come it's not going by law, if that's what we run by the Constitution? Like equal rights and stuff.
Hang on a second. So what you're saying is, if the Constitution is the highest law of the land, and we have statute laws under that, what's the order?
Yeah.
Who follows what? I'm going to talk about that. Okay? So, the law is also used for facilitating a sense that change is possible. Change is possible. It may not be quick. It may not be as quick as we want. It may be very slow. But it is possible. And it encourages social justice. It guarantees personal freedoms. And it serves as a moral guide. These are our ultimate hopes for the purposes of law. But they're made by human beings. And human beings can fail. And human beings can be brought to their knees. So we have to watch and be very careful. We're going to classify some of the law that we're going to talk about. Private law. Private law involves disputes between private individuals or groups. So if I have a dispute with Robert. That's private law. The law that he and I argue is private law between us. Public law involves disputes between private individuals or groups and the government. So Robert and I can agree eventually and then say, but the government won't let us do this. Let's go argue with the government. That involves public law. So there's private, which is between citizens, and there is public, which is between citizens and the government. Okay? Civil law. Civil law involves the rights and responsibilities involved in relationships between persons and their government. That is what we call civil law. The government, through our legislators, make the law, and then under that law, we are given certain rights and responsibilities. We're also given certain privileges and duties. Criminal law involves incidents which someone commits an act against the public as a whole. Drag racing down Jefferson Street. This does happen. Drag racing down Jefferson Street is very dangerous. Anyone who is in the vicinity of those vehicles can be hurt. So the criminal law says you're not allowed to go drag racing. That is an act that can injure the public as a whole. Civil law requires that citizens take up the prosecution of whatever offense it is. Criminal law says the government will take up prosecution of the offense. Yeah.
So what's the difference between the public law and the civil law? Since the public law is between a person and the government, and civil law is still the same between the individual and
Okay. You're drawing a bright line. This is all shades of light and dark. Public law and civil law can be the same thing. Public law and criminal law can be the same thing. It depends on the circumstances. That's a very good question.
so what's the exemplary circumstances for it to for a situation to be a public law, and what is exemplary situation for it to be a civil law?
If it's a civil law, if it does not involve frequently a criminal action, it is still a public law because it's the government that enforces it. Okay? Does that make sense?
What kind of situation is a civil?
Civil, go ahead, Joanne.
Okay, so maybe like clarification for that would be, is it saying, so are you saying that civil law is pretty much if something happens that's not completely a criminal offense, but it's something that's like, just not right, or maybe like we just don't agree on it. So like something that we just don't agree on, but we're offended by it. So as a for civil law, the citizen that doesn't agree by it takes the offense takes them to be prosecuted, right?
Yes.
And then with criminal law, it's still the same situation, we just don't agree with it, but also the government doesn't agree with it. So the government will prosecute that offense.
That's a good explanation. Does that make sense? Okay. So, where did our law come from? Anybody know what this flag is? The Union Jack, the United Kingdom. Tell me what three flags are united in this one flag.
You mean like the color ride?
Great Britain.
Great Britain. Okay, what does the flag of Great Britain look like?
The cross on the white background?
Cross on a white background. What's another one?
I don't know.
Okay, Scotland.
That's awesome.
Scotland is the white X on the blue background. That's Scotland. So what is all this white in here that surrounds the red cross? I'll bet some of you know it. If you play golf, you've seen it. Yeah.
I think I know. Is it Northern Ireland?
Yes, it is. That's exactly right. And a lot of folks know it because the different flags are used when players come from different countries. And it's very unusual. You know, they all, in the Olympics, they all swim or run or do whatever they do, high jump or whatever, under the UK flag. But playing golf, they separate.
Why?
I don't know. Why don't you find that out for me? So, where does American law come from? Well, it's based on the English common law legal system. And the English common law legal system is called stare decisis. Any Latin scholars in here? Anybody who's ever come into contact with Latin? Yeah. Okay. Stare decisis. Is that a correct pronunciation?
I'll take it.
You'll take it? You're going to have it. It is incorrect according to the proper Latin. It is stare decisis in Latin. But in the first year of law school, we take a course that is called The Way to Mispronounce Every Single Latin Word in the Entire Vocabulary. Or at least it seems that way. And all the pronunciations are changed. So stare decisis is the basis of English common law, and it's judge-made law. And American law got its system from Great Britain. So, how did this start out? Here's a story. Back in medieval times, all of the feudal lords owned all of the land around their castles. And they had vassals, people who were living on the land, and they provided income and upkeep for the Lord by taxing and by growing things for the Lord so that he could sell them in commerce and just all sorts of stuff like that. And there was an example that I usually use of a man, because they were allowed to keep some of their own produce. The farmers were allowed to keep a part of the produce that they grew for the Lord. They took that into town, in the middle of town. And lo and behold, they were having all sorts of problems because the roads got so crowded that nobody could get by, and everybody was stuck on the roads for a long, long time. So, the Lord called his counselors in and said, we need to resolve this problem. And the counselors, his name was Zach, said, Lord Robert, we need to restrict the times when the knights are on the road so that the farmers can get their produce to market. Because if they can't get their produce to market, they can't feed their families because we're taxing everything else and taking their produce from the field. And he said, we'll need someone to judge. Who's going to do this? And so they say, we need someone who's a very knowledgeable individual, and we'll give him a title. What's a really great title? Oh, okay, Justice of the Peace. Anybody ever heard of that? Justices of the peace used to be all over the place in England. They were like the little local judges. They're like municipal court judges. And the justice of the peace would then hear arguments between people that involved things that were going on within the Lord's fiefdom.
I thought it was fiefdom.
I learned to pronounce it fiefdom. But then again, I took that course is how to mispronounce every Latin word you've ever heard. So we'll go with it. Anyhow, there was Farmer Green. And Farmer Green had his turnips on his cart. And he and his little pony were going to market. And the Lord had set up the law to say that between 6 p.m. and 6 a.m., nobody can be on the roads. But at 6 a.m. and first light, the farmer was allowed to be on the road until midday, and nobody could interfere with it. That meant no knights could ride on the roads during market day. Makes perfect sense, doesn't it? Because so the farmers can get into town, sell their wares, their produce. There was this knight. He was late for a meeting at the castle. And you know the way these knights are, and you know how these meetings go. Have to be at that meeting. You know, he was a type A knight. What do I mean by type A? Type A personality? He's real stressed out and real driven, and he's got to get there. So, Knight A rode his horse in full armor down the road, and holy smoke, he runs right into the turnip cart, overturns it, and the farmer looks up at the sun, and it's just a little bit up after dawn. And he says, "Knight, what did you do? You overturned my turnip truck." And the knight looks down at him and says, "Go complain to the justice of the peace." Well, that's what Farmer Green did. He went before the justice of the peace. The justice of the peace had the authority to drag the knight in, and it was the Lord's authority. Drag him into whatever courtroom they were using at the time, and say, "Look, knight, I want to hear your side of the story." He gets the knight's side of the story. He says, "Okay, Green, I want you to tell us your side of the story." And then he asks for witnesses. And the other farmers are saying, "Yeah, the sun was barely up. I mean, it wasn't even noon. And Farmer Green was actually in front of us. And the knight knocked over his turnip truck. And it just went off into the field and overturned into this mess of water and muck and mud. And the turnips are ruined. He doesn't have anything to pay for the Lord, for his taxes, or for enough money to put meat on the table for his family." So, the judge, the justice of the peace says, "Knight A, you're liable for this. You're going to pay Farmer Green for his turnips. Every single one of them." And that meant that Knight A had to sell his armor and his horse. So, that was not what could have been the most popular decision. But it was equitable, because the Lord had made that rule or law because the farmers needed to feed their families, stay strong and healthy, and sell their produce so they could pay their taxes, and the Lord could continue to raise an army when he needed it. Right? That was written into a book. And every law book in medieval England was written under the name of the justice of the peace, and then the volume number, and the number of cases in that book. So it would be Justice Poe, Volume 1. It was his very first case, and it had to be this big burly knight. So, the knight went his way, the Lord went his way, and Farmer Green was happy and went his way, and that was the end of that case. Until, over in the next county, in a fiefdom there, was Lord Sheffield, and he made the same exact law, because he thought the law was really good that his next of kin, probably, over in Edgefield made, and the Lord of Edgefield was his older brother, so he said, I'll adopt your law there, older brother. And so the same law was there. If the sun is between the horizon and high in the sky at noon, then the farmers were on the road. Well, Farmer Brown. Farmer Brown was a type B farmer. He had a type B personality. Anybody know what a type B personality is? What is it?
Not really a personality, he just wants something but not too bad, not so bad.
Not so bad. He's real laid back, real easy
Doesn't get the
going.
job done.
He'll get the job done, but he's not going to be in any hurry about it. You know, he's just real easy going. So he gets out on the road, goes to market, but he gets out about 11 o'clock in the morning. And all of a sudden, the church bells at the town ring noon. And he's still on the road. And here comes this knight charging down the road, late for a meeting with the Lord of Edgehill, and knocks Farmer Brown's turnips into the ditch. It wasn't the same ditch, it was a different ditch. Knocks it into the ditch. The knight says the same thing. You think you have a dispute with me, take it to the justice of the peace. So the justice of the peace gets this written request from Farmer Brown that says, this knight overturned my turnips, I will have nothing to feed my family with. I feel that I have been wronged. Wow. That's a big accusation. So the justice of the peace, who's brand new, doesn't know what he's doing, he's brand new, he says, I'm gonna go from here, I'm gonna go from Edgehill, I'm gonna go over the hilltop and get that justice of the peace's decision on what happened with Farmer Green, because I heard they have the same kind of situation over there. So he goes over there, and he gets this decision, and he reads it. He has somebody they used to call a scrivener who would write all these things down. And he goes over and he writes it all down. He brings it down back to the justice of the peace. And he tells the sheriff. Now, the sheriff used to actually work for the justice of the peace. The sheriff of Nottingham was not actually a really big guy in England. He worked for the local justice of the peace. I don't know how Robin Hood got it all wrong, but as literary license sometimes works, they kind of work it around like that. He was a Haiti guy. So the sheriff goes out, he brings Farmer Green in, and he brings the knight. But the knight comes in voluntarily because he knows that it's not the same case. And the justice of the peace takes all of the evidence and he looks at that other case and he says, well, based on this case from the justice of the peace in Hilltop, the facts are not the same. The facts in this case say, Farmer Brown, you were not supposed to be on the road because it was noon, and it's a different situation than the same rule than over in the other town. So is the decision going to be the same? No, it's not. What happens in this one? Anybody want to guess?
He doesn't get the, he doesn't get.
He did not get the value of his produce. The farmer had to take the hit. The farmer had to take the hit in this case. But what's important about this is not the story itself. It's what happened in the order of the story. Farmer Green was right and had a certain set of facts and received a certain decision. Farmer Brown's case was based on Farmer Green's case with a slightly different set of facts. Ceases. Each case and the decisions and the law and the facts in each case built upon the facts and the decisions of the one before it, and eventually it evolved into an entire body of law in England that we call the common law. It's called the common law because it was common across all regions of the United Kingdom. And it was built one decision upon the next. And it is judge-made law. The judge made the law. And they were backed up by the lords of the different fiefdoms. We have two types of courts. Two types of courts. I'm going to give you a break after this, so hang with me. Courts of equity and equitable remedies versus a court of law. Now, that justice of the peace that was trying to decide on what should happen to Farmer Brown, that was what we called a court of equity. Why? Because the equitable remedy was the decision that the knight owed the guy money, the value of his turnips. That was the court of equity. Eventually, they appointed another justice of the peace so that there were two of them. One who would make the decision and write it up, and one who would decide how much the damage was to all those turnips. Do they get part of the turnip value? Do they get all of the turnip value? Did they hurt the pony? Did they destroy the cart? You know, all of those things. That would be decided by another justice of the peace who would then award the damages from the knight to the farmer, or from whoever to whoever. So you first have to get your equitable decision. It was called a writ. W-R-I-T, a writ. We still have documents that are called writs. We have something called a writ of mandamus here in the United States. You don't have to write this down. Writ of mandamus. A writ of mandamus says that we're going to make the government do what it was supposed to do in the first place. The writ of mandamus is given by the Supreme Court of a state. We also have something we call a writ of replevin in the United States. A writ of replevin. And what that is an order from the Court of Equity that says, you took your lawnmower, you're allowed to go get it back. That's a writ of replevin, and that would be given if we were back in England during common law days. That would be through the Court of Equity. All right? And then, if we could not get the lawnmower back, say somebody sold the lawnmower, which, you know, can happen. The court would then award damages, money damages, in the amount of $249 for the guy to go out and buy a new lawnmower. But he'd have to prove how much the lawnmower was worth and how much he would have to pay for a new one, right? Then we have incidental damages and court costs. Incidental damages and court costs. Court costs, you know, there are filing fees, that's a court cost. You have to have the lawsuit served on the individual, either by the sheriff or through the mail or something like that. This all costs money. And in every lawsuit, court costs and damages, and sometimes attorney fees, yes, because people like me to get paid, we do not work for free. Are awarded by the court of law as a matter for that particular court. So we have the court of equity that comes up with the decision, and the court of law, which takes in all the evidence as to how much everything is worth. You get paid for. Now, modern courts, like the courts we have here in Davidson County, or the courts you have, who's from Tennessee? Okay, who's from someplace else? Where? Chicago. Chicago. Where are you from?
LA.
LA.
Yeah.
Oh, we're smooth. Where else? Where are you? Chicago. I'm not going to do this over and over again, believe me. What? Where are you from?
Louisiana.
I was afraid of that. I thought I heard you say that the other day. Yeah. You have a question?
No, I just have my hand.
I see. All right. So, anywhere you're from, you have different operations at different courts. Anybody from Pennsylvania? Anybody from Pennsylvania? No? No Pittsburgh Steelers fans in here? You're a Steelers fan? You can leave. No. In Pennsylvania, they still have, most of us, the courts in Illinois, courts in Louisiana. Oh, well, I'll explain about Louisiana in a minute. They're kind of interesting. Courts in most states, in 48 of our states, combine the courts of equity and the courts of law into one single person who sits on that bench, makes a decision, and decides how much the individual who's been damaged receives.
Judy, the show.
Yeah, well, that's not really the way it works. That's not. No, have you ever been in a real court? That's not a real court. Let me finish with this, and then we'll go back to that. Pennsylvania is the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Any state that has Commonwealth of Virginia, Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, all have separate common law courts and courts of equity, which means you still have to go to one before you go to the other. And there's different types of proof in one than there is in the other. Now, Louisiana has combined in its wisdom the courts of law and the courts of equity. That's good. And the problem is they fall under the Code Napoleon, which makes them do it in French. The law in the state of Louisiana, I cannot practice in Louisiana. I get so mixed up when we're switching back between French law and common law, and statute law, and the U.S. Constitution. It's just very confusing. I'm sorry. Now, we were going to talk about something else, weren't we? Yeah, somebody brought up.
Oh, Judge.
Judge Judy.
So it's real.
How does Judge Judy work?
It's fake.
It's fake.
It's not fake.
It's not
No,
fake.
It's not fake.
Her cases aren't that serious, like.
It's just like petty
Aren't they
cases,
like-
small cases,
You know,
not like big
What's
time
it,
criminal
isn't there a name
cases.
for them, for like small cases, or like cases under a certain money limit, like under 5,000, under 1,500, something like that?
What she does is called arbitration. What she does is arbitration. She hears testimony from both sides, has evidence presented to her, and she arbitrates it. She comes down with a decision. Now, the people that come in there to that arbitration are bound by the terms by binding arbitration. They sign a contract, which we'll talk about. We'll talk about arbitrations when we go into the judicial system as an alternative dispute resolution methodology. Yeah,
Do you get paid to go on Judge Judy?
do you get paid?
I know someone who went on it, but
If they win, they're supposed to receive a judgment. The judgment is under the contract that they sign when they go on the show.
I'm saying that because the TV producers pay too.
Yes, the TV producers get paid too. Oh, yeah.
I'm saying
No, do
they
they,
pay
you
them.
know, like.
Oh, do the
Just for
people,
being on the show.
do
not
the
like your
people
case.
who appear on the show pay the producers? No.
No.
Dude, they pay them. You know, like how
But the
it's
plaintiff-
game shows and stuff like that, and they get paid for being on the show. They get
No.
paid for being on the show.
No, they get a decision. That's all they get. And there are actually people that go around to various small claims courts looking for the most volatile possible decisions to bring onto those shows. Now, let's not talk about that. Let's talk about real law. Okay?
I'll tell Judge Judy.
So let's take a break. Let's take a break for 10 minutes and be back here at 6:45. All right?
You said,
Okay, so now let's talk about sources of American law. This is the basis of your question, Shri, was what is higher in the law? And where do we get what is higher in the law? Start with the Constitution. This is the highest law of our land. The United States Constitution. This is what all of our rights, privileges, duties, and immunities are based upon. This is that body of law which is our natural law. It is the highest body of law that can be created by our populace at this particular time in our country. Beneath the Constitution, which was drafted in and of itself and can be amended from time to time, which allows for sociological change, is statute law. Where do you think statute law comes from? What? The statute.
justice? I don't know.
What is statute law?
It's like state law.
It's state law. It's state law, but there are also federal statutes. But where does it come
Are
from?
they like standing laws, like not standing actually, but like-
Standing laws. It is standing law, yes.
I think it's like laws.
What happened to Farmer Brown and Farmer Green?
Are they like different counties or something?
It comes from
The Supreme Court.
No, it's like,
stare decisis. Here's what happens. When we have decisions in a court of law that have reached just this huge amount of law inside this one topic, our legislators take that topic and they write all this law in these huge books into a statute. That's where statute law comes from. Once upon a time, it was precedent, or stare decisis. We call our common law precedent. And judges make the precedents, but they don't write the law. Because what they write as a precedent is only good in their own jurisdiction. That's it. Their own county, their own state. It's only good there. It can't be good anywhere else. So if it's a good enough precedent, then legislature takes that, writes it into a statute, and it becomes law for everybody. Okay? Does everybody see how that works? Now, so we have the statute. We have the Constitution, we have the statute. And the statute says one thing, and of course, as things go during life, new circumstances arise. For the Farmer Greens and the Farmer Browns of the world just keep right on coming at you. What happens to the statute when something doesn't fit cleanly under a statute? That's something else. Statute of limitations is an entirely different concept. And we'll talk about that when we get to tort law and criminal law. What happens when law keeps coming at you all the time? Well, you have to find a way to reconcile it with the statute. So if it's good enough, they write it into the statute. And then they start making more precedents. And the statute is more well-defined. And then all of a sudden, it's not well enough defined, and it ends up in the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court says, this isn't well-defined. Try again. So then it has to go back to the legislature again, doesn't it? So precedents, or things that happen in court, are often written into statutes. Okay? So, that's the second highest law of our land, of our state. Every state has a constitution. Our federal government has a constitution. Every state has statute law. The federal government has statute law. Then we have something called uniform state laws. Now, these aren't exactly laws in and of themselves. What they are is a whole bunch of guys like me who've been practicing law for 30 years get together and say, this isn't working real well, let's write a book. And that book becomes our example of what the law should look like. And it becomes a uniform state law if we can put on, you ever heard of a dog and pony show? If we put on a dog and pony show, which is, we take it around to all 50 states and we say, can you see how beneficial this would be to have all of these laws enacted the same way in all 50 states? And everybody says, yes, we can see that. That way the lawyers in our jurisdiction know when they go to the next jurisdiction what the practice is going to look like, how they handle it, what they do. That's what uniform state laws are. An example of that is the Uniform Probate Code, which everybody needs a will. Your parents all have wills? You don't know.
I have a question. When, some states, do, death penalty, like, depending on what you do, you could do death instead of going to prison. Is that how the uniform state law?
No.
So what's that?
That is done state by state. There are some states that do not have the death penalty. Okay? Uniform state laws are laws that a whole bunch of guys got together and wrote up and then took it to every state and said, boy, this would really be good to practice it all the same way. Uniform adoption law. I have practiced under the Uniform Adoption Code in 4 different states simultaneously. I have practiced under the Uniform Probate Code. The Uniform Probate Code says that if this person dies without a will, our law provides a will for them in state law. And it's all written out, just like a will in state law. That's the state probate code. State adoption code sets out all the good stuff you need to adopt a baby in a state. And it's the same in Tennessee as it is in Kentucky, in Ohio, in Illinois, in Indiana, in Arkansas, in Texas, in Georgia, in Florida, all over the place. Louisiana. Everywhere. It's the same uniform law where someone can go in and say, well, my lawyer right now, he lives in Arkansas, we're in Louisiana, we want to adopt a baby that's in Louisiana, but we want to bring them back to Arkansas. Can we do that under the code? And the code is the same, so yes, they can do that, depending on other provisions and other parts of the law in the 2 states. So that's what a uniform state law is. So we have our constitutional law, we have our statute law, and underneath statute law, in little parentheses, we put common law, because every state has its own common law, all those little precedents that keep getting generated until they write them into the statute. And then we have uniform state laws, which a whole bunch of guys get together, write it up into a book, and then go around and see if all the states will accept it. Okay? Those are the 3 types of law we have. The Constitution being the highest. Then we have a thing called administrative law. Administrative law is for agencies. Now, I know we're all going to find this to be a foreign concept, but sometimes Congress actually says, we don't really know what we're doing with this. We need experts. Help. And they go out and they write a law which allows for an agency to be created, which we'll study when we study administrative law. An agency to be created, which then will have experts in it that will administer the entire body of law under that subject. Like the Environmental Protection Agency. Congress actually admitted it really didn't know what it was doing when it was related to environmental law. I know we all find that a little strange. Congress thought it didn't know something. But the people that work inside that agency do. And when we study administrative law, you'll see that there's a little mini government. Did I say that with an accent? Yeah, I did, kind of, didn't I? I was in Tennessee way too long. Since 1994. There's a little mini government inside each administrative agency. So they have an executive branch, they have a legislative branch, and they have a judicial branch, all wrapped up inside this one agency to take care of these matters. And they're the subject matter experts in that area. Then case law. Case law is precedent. Case law comes under statute law. Case law are precedents. They're synonymous terms. Case law, precedents, and stare decisis are all synonymous for the same thing. It's a decision that the judge has handed down, and inside that case, there is 1 or 2 sentences which are truly brilliant. Those eventually become the basis for part of a statute or for a major decision, which will define that type of law or that part of the law at some point in time. And then we have restatements of the law. Has anyone ever heard of Prosser on torts? No? Nobody's heard of Prosser on torts? I'm not surprised. It's only law geeks like me that have heard of Prosser on torts. Prosser on torts is a book. It's a textbook that talks about torts and how they should be operated and how they should be done and who does it and when they're done and how they're done and what the statute of limitations ought to be. And it fits it all together. Did they try and do anything with it? Well, they try and get it published. But no, other than that, no. It's just out there. And it's there as a reference for judges and for lawyers who want to go in and take a look at what's happening right now, what's new in the world of torts, what's new in the world of property law, what's new in zoning, what's new in criminal law, etc. Okay? That's what a restatement is. These are sources of American law, from the Constitution on down. Now, what we're going to study this semester is something we call black letter law. That is that sentence or two in each decision that's really important, that ends up outlasting not just that case, but the life of the judge and the lives of all the jury members who sat on that case combined. And it is part of our legal system forever. That's what black letter law is. It's so important that it's actually printed in some decisions and referenced in some cases in large, bold type. These types of principles are in opinions by courts and in statutes. And we all know that this, opinions by the courts, eventually becomes statute. So that's what we're going to look at this particular semester. Okay? That's what you'll be familiar with. That's what every speaker that comes in here is going to talk about. So, what are some of the functional areas of business law that we're going to be working with and we're going to talk about? Well, corporate management. Corporate management involves law all the time, and ethics, because ethics is a part of law. Production and transportation, marketing. I'll have examples as we go through the semester of all of these things and how they fit. Research and development. Are you allowed to do certain things with your research subjects? Yes or no? That's under the law, or that's under ethics. Accounting and finance. All my accountants. There's an entire section of the CPA exam on nothing but law. And human resource management. Human resource management is nothing but law and ethics. You might think it's everybody running around doing certain things, training people, doing this, that, and the other thing. It all functions under the law and under ethical codes that are set up for various businesses. We're halfway. It's 5 after 7.